Thank you for joining us for Designing with Water, Collaborative Solutions for Coastal Cities. My name is Tina Brennan. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Metropolis. As many of you are probably aware, especially those of you who have joined us for past think tanks, this is the 6th year for Metropolis's Think Tank series, a thought leadership enlightening program that visits top firms in key markets in North America. We launched the virtual version of this program in August, visiting with firms from San Francisco. Last month, we were hosted by firms in Chicago, and this month we find ourselves in Miami. Today, we are very pleased to be hosted by DesignTV, who will be talking about creating more sustainable and resilient communities. In October, we'll be also hosted by Schulman and Associates and HKS. Upcoming Think Tank Thursday programming can be found on the registration page and will be continually updated. The registration URL is in the chat. The discussions from today's panel will be videotaped and available for viewing on demand next week on the Metropolis website. Today's panel is CEU accredited, both through AIA and IDCEC. If you did not request accreditation when you registered, please send an email to ceu@metropolis.com. The URL can also be found in the chat room. We will not be using the raised hand or chat function today for questions or comments. However, you can submit, and we encourage you to submit questions at any time using the Q&A feature. Please note that you can upvote questions that you would like to be answered, as those questions will be taken first. Hosting an event like this requires the support of great firms like DesignTV, as well as our amazing sponsors. Durkin, our world-renowned industry leader in innovative design solutions and stylish, high-performance hospitality carpeting and hard surface flooring solutions. Grohe, designing and engineering innovative water products for bathroom solutions and kitchen fittings. And Material Bank, the largest material marketplace for sampling in the architecture and interior design industry. And now I would like to introduce Metropolis's Editor-in-Chief, Avi Rajagopal. Avi?
Thank you so much, Tina. And thank you all for joining us today. I'm so thrilled to see people from all over the country and from overseas joining us for a discussion about how we're going to design for coastal cities. Coastal cities this year, especially here on the eastern seaboard of the United States, have been hit pretty hard, both by COVID-19 as well as storms and hurricanes, greater frequency than we've had in past years of needs. And so architects find themselves having to work much more closely than ever before with their clients, with local policymakers, with landscape architects, and with engineers to create new solutions for cities. The cross-disciplinary collaborations can bring together blue infrastructure, that is infrastructure that deals with water, and green infrastructure, infrastructure for sustainability, as we track the twin goals of keeping our buildings and our communities resilient and sustainable, both through to help us talk about that today, we have an amazing group of panelists. Thank you so much for joining us, Rishi Kapoor, who's the CEO of Location Ventures, Barton J. Fye, who's a civil engineer from Kinley Horn and Associates, Inc. Thank you so much, Barton, for joining us. And Jacqueline Touzé, who is a principal at Touzé Studio. Jacqueline, thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to start with a question for Rishi. Rishi, at Location Ventures, you're looking at what the future of development is going to be in South Florida. And I see your background is your latest concept, Urban, which is co-living, co-working, as well as wellness all put together. There it is. You can see it. So tell us a little bit about...
she gets all the credit.
So yeah, we're going to hear more about the collaboration in a minute, but give us an introduction to Urban, and tell us how dealing with the particular challenges that coastal cities face is part of Urban's concept.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate joining you today. It's a fascinating subject that my firm and I are quite passionate about, and very happy to be here with the panelists, as well as thank you for all of those that are watching us today. So, Urban for us, very plainly, it's one of 4 divisions within the company, but it's what I'm dedicating to my life's work on building a brand around the pillars of sustainable living, working, and wellness. And that's just not of a building, but it's of the people and the community that it serves as well. And that's really what we mean by wellness. That's really what we mean by sustainability. It's not just one factor or another. And for us, the idea is we wanted to deliver an affordable solution for people to live, work, and seek wellness in the most desirable submarkets around the world. So our business plan is 100 locations over the next decade, 3 in South Florida, a 4th location that we'll be announcing soon. Ultimately, it's about affordable price points for many people that are priced out of being able to live in some of these in-demand areas. For example, the heart of South Beach and the heart of Coconut Grove and the heart of Coral Gables. And we're not talking about housing that is either older or housing that people wouldn't consider today's standards. We're talking about A-level housing with A-level amenities that come with furnished apartments, as well as workspaces dedicated to entrepreneurs and artists. And the entire idea is to help people feel like they are a part of a neighborhood that they want to be in at an accessible price point. And then our ultimate ambition with the platform and the international goal is to be able to have a single location membership or a multiple location membership to live and work and have what we call freedom of life, to be able to travel throughout the platform and experience different cultures and countries. And then the other part that is really important to us is the building's impact on the community. So for us, it's all about using leading resiliency and sustainability practices. These projects for us are long-term holds, so we're willing to make investments that align with the goals of being a great operator in the heart of these communities. So ultimately, it's not about leasing up, selling it, and kind of trying to conserve cost the best that you can, which we are obviously cost sensitive, but it doesn't mean that we're not willing to make an investment that we think is going to have a long-term positive impact for us and our community. So we'll get into more of that as we discuss, but that's a high level of us and Urban, both on the operational level as well as our mission with the real estate.
Absolutely. I think being in South Florida, as you are headquartered, even though you're going to be in many submarkets around the world, as you said, but I think starting in South Florida, as you're doing, has definitely, I suspect, had an impact on that thinking about resilience and sustainability. Just because some of the most desirable real estate in the United States, in many cases, is in coastal regions. It's where we see high levels of development. And those are the places that, as we said right at the start of this conversation, have the most need for buildings and communities to kind of live in harmony with nature. Barton, I'd love to bring you in here on that. Your background, even before you were at Kimley Horn, was in stormwater management systems. That's something that's coming into play now, I'm sure, as more and more people are starting to, even people who were, not necessarily concerned about that previously. I mean, Florida, of course, is hurricane country, but other places as well. What are some priorities in engineering for anybody who wants to build in coastal cities today, especially in Florida? How are you now incorporating the growing concern around sea level rise, as well as all that brings with it, including incursion of salt water into the aquifer and so on, with the storms that seem to be coming our way with increasing regularity? So how are you managing both of those things, and what would be our priorities in that context?
Sure, thank you. You know, there are really two competing things going on related to stormwater and flooding in South Florida. And what I love about working in South Florida is it's so unique and so different from everywhere else in the country in this regard. We have plenty of coastal communities, the city of Miami Beach, with very high property values, people that really want to be here and live here and love living here. We have great weather year round and it attracts people. And we're blessed in many regards with this geology that's different from most of the rest of the world. It allows us to use stormwater systems that drain right into our ground. Our aquifer is incredible. And yet that has sort of become our crutch too. As you know, water is going to flow both ways. So what we've seen more and more is as the sea level rises, now we have this sunny day flooding issue. We have an issue where during high tides, and especially during king tides, water is actually coming out of our drainage systems instead of going into our drainage systems. And that's something that most people are just not in the situation to experience. Even if the water rises like that in other places, they're usually sitting on some type of clay material or something that's going to protect them from that, but we're not. So, you know, more and more we're seeing that. And I always say in an area like where we are, more than anywhere else in the world, coastal flooding and stormwater are almost competing problems. Because the water comes out of the sky and we want it to go away, it needs to go into the ground. Well, if we've also got this coastal flooding, it's pushing back the other way, and it's this imbalance that we have down here. And so from a long-term perspective, we need to be adaptable. There's gonna be no true way to deal with this other than a global solution, right? I mean, let's be real, right? There needs to be a global solution for these issues. But as a community, we can't personally control that input of sea level rise. So we need to be ready to be adaptable for that. So when I talk to developers about projects, one of the things I say is, if you're holding on to this in the long term, you want to be prepared for the future when the city comes out and they raise the road because it's flooding constantly. So you want to know that if you need to raise the floor of your lobby a foot or 2 feet, depending on how long the use of this building is, that you can do that without a significant future investment, that you've already planned that from day one. And that's just, it's so important, I think, and it's nice to work with developers who understand that and who see that from the beginning and understand the value that creates in the long term for the project. You know, as far as how do we account for sea level rise, I mean, it's adaptability and it's resiliency. And I think a lot of times we forget what resiliency means. It's not just that we're going to protect ourselves from everything. It's that some things are going to fail, but we're prepared to get back on our feet quickly. You know, what we're seeing more and more of down here in South Florida is undergrounding all of our overhead utilities, because it would seem counterintuitive. The groundwater is right there. You're putting electrical utilities right into the groundwater. They're underwater. Doesn't make sense. You're bringing those transformers from 30 feet in the air down to ground level as well. And people get scared by this thought of the transformer is going to flood. Yeah, the transformer is going to flood and the power is going to go out. But it's a lot easier to wash out the transformer and bring it back online than it is to replace the mile of overhead lines that are going to get knocked down by the wind. So it's considering the ability of your community to bounce back. You can't realistically prevent everything from going wrong, but you can definitely be prepared to bounce back quickly. And I think that's something that we all need to be talking about when we plan these projects, is how are we personally going to bounce back quickly from a disaster? So.
Thank you so much for that, Barton. I think, you know, you're really setting us straight on sort of what the basic principle and approach for resiliency needs to be, especially in places that are really facing some hard choices. You know, at this moment, California is in much the same situation when it comes to air quality. You know, water is not the problem there, but, you know, Certainly with periodic wildfires there, they have much the similar problem with air. And I think you've reminded us that resiliency is not just about, making sure that nothing bad happens, going about our lives unaffected, because that might just not be possible, but rather to focus on, what are the priorities we need to set in place so we can bounce back the quickest. And that's such an important perspective for this whole conversation. So thank you so much for that. Jacqueline, I'd like to bring you in here. So you've been a long-time advocate for preparing for climate impact in your region in South Florida. What do you see as the architect's role here? I mean, certainly, if we have, enlightened developers like Rishi is, and we have, engineers and other expertise, that is willing to work with us to understand, how systems need to behave under challenging circumstances. How are you partnering with both experts and clients to prepare for climate impact in your work?
That's a great question. Well, I think our job has never been more important, that we lead and that we inform our clients and to work with our teams. And I think there's never been a time that we've depended more on our civil and our landscape consultants to work as a team in tandem with us to develop a resiliency strategy that's not just about the building. So sometimes you get lucky, and when you have a client, Rishi is one of those rare, unicorn clients that you get that says, what is our resiliency strategy? What are we doing that's ahead of the curve, not reacting, but anticipating? And that's great. With other clients that aren't there, then our job is to educate and to inform. Unfortunately, this topic can be very scary, right? And at a time of diminishing resources, when we're all impacted by pandemic, it's going to get even more challenging to talk about things that are not code requirements yet. But to really instill this idea that we have to do best practices, because just because it's not a code requirement yet, in the near future, it's going to impact you either in insurance, or it's going to impact you in financing, or it's going to impact you just in resiliency, and that your community that you're building is not going to be able to bounce back quicker, and the value of that asset that you're building is going to get diminished over time. And so what we're doing is we're advocating, and we're not just because of the human side and the community side, which is what is near and dear to my heart, but also to really put the business side there for them to understand. And so our job is to be informed, and then to be advocates for those people that don't have that voice, right? Because I think one of the things that I love about this project and other projects that we're working on, community-based projects, so we're doing a pilot project in a park that's underserved in Miami as a resiliency pilot project, is this idea of what are essential workers and who lives in near urban areas. This project is in a desirable area. And the idea that you're thinking about affordability and transportation, because that's another crisis that we're facing in our community and in a lot of other communities. And that you're able to say, if people don't live near where they work, and they don't have good transport and they don't have affordability, then if you do have a crisis, then how do you respond? Where do those police people come from? Where are those first responders? What is an essential worker, really? And now in the time of COVID, I think we have to look at that and ask ourselves, are we really building resilient communities if every sector of our social network, right, that we're all tied together, isn't able to come back and respond? And so on projects that we have, or that we're blessed to have clients that are, enlightened or forward thinking and want to push the envelope, then we push the envelope and we do our very best to deliver it. Because, it's a fact. If you're doing something that somebody else is not doing in the development world, our responsibility is to deliver resiliency effectively, make good choices about where those dollars are going to get the maximum impact for those dollars, and to do so in a thoughtful way as part of a team. That's our role. And to be informed of what's coming, and not rely on the code. I'm a big advocate for changing the code so that a lot of this is not just Rishi doing this by himself, but that everybody has to do this. Because for example, on this project, we're building in 5 feet of freeboard. This lobby that we're building, and the ability to, when the roads are raised, that our building can adapt to it, right? We're building in shady platform, a shady plaza that the trees can work with green infrastructure. We're building in cisterns to hold the water so we release it slowly, and we're being a good neighbor to our neighborhood, our community, by holding the water and releasing it slowly. So all of those strategies cost money, right? And if you're going to do that and the code doesn't require it, then the developer that does it is penalized in some way, right? That's why I believe personally that our other job is to advocate for code changes that make it not in my backyard thinking go away. Because if we're not raising the building because we can't. We have to wait for the rows to be raised. But our building is adaptable. The developer that doesn't do it is going to be fighting the road being raised in the future because they didn't think ahead. And so they're going to be fighting that which we all need as a community to be resilient. An example of that right now in Miami Beach is very, very progressive in changing the code and having that freeboard adapt to, we get 5 feet of extra height if we build in that adaptability, right? But it's optional. It's voluntary. My view is that it should be code. It should be required. But it's a heavy political lift when the people in the communities are like, please don't do this, because then my building is going to be below the road raising. So it's not an easy conversation to have. That's why the role of architects increasingly is going to be about informing communities, informing our developers, informing that, to really build consensus and have transparency so people understand the need for these things in the code. Just like we did, by the way, the example that I always use is in Miami, we were leaders in the wind code. After Hurricane Andrew, when I graduated from school, we just had hit by a major hurricane. So everybody was in the solutions business as to how do we avoid getting that kind of loss again. And so we redid our codes, and we invested in a tremendous amount of resources in writing one of the toughest wind codes in the country. And then it was voluntary in South Florida, but not the rest of the state. Well, what happens is a couple of years later and the Panhandle gets hit by a hurricane, those people that followed the South Florida building code, their buildings withstood the storm. The people that did not, they lost everything. So sometimes, our role is like do no harm in medicine. Our role is life safety. Our role is community resilience. Our role is to make sure that we're building things that are going to last, not just to preserve assets for our clients and to preserve value, but life and loss of, so much. If we cannot bounce back, we don't have a viable community. So we have to advocate for that.
Right. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. I think you've laid out a long sort of a multi-spoked approach here. Several things stand out to me. One is, of course, your really astute, I think, analysis of how it's not just about buildings, but about communities. Rishi was talking about preserving affordability in communities. And of course, Barton's responses all rely on responders, so unless we have responders in those communities who can come in and help communities bounce back, you're right. That's such a vital piece of the puzzle here. Thank you also so much for the examples around code, where I'm sure I'm already seeing questions about codes coming up in the Q&A. So let's take those as a group in just a few minutes, but that's fantastic. Thank you so much for that. I'd just like to remind everyone, some of you seem to be doing it already, but we can take a lot of questions today. So please go ahead and put your questions into the Q&A button today. Unfortunately, today we don't have upvoting, but please go ahead and just put your question in, and I'm here to kind of bring them up and moderate as we go along. So please put your questions into the Q&A tab. Before we move any further, just a reminder, we're here talking about designing with water with Barton 5 from Kinley Horn, Rishi Kapoor from Location Ventures, and Jacqueline Touze from Touze Studio. Thank you also to our sponsors today, Durkin, Grohe, and Material Bank, for making today's discussion possible. I'm going to start bringing up some questions from our audience here. Alicia Armbruster asks, and this might be a question for both Rishi and Jackie to take on at start. What is the best way to inform communities of the need for code change, even without climate change impacts and so on? Do more architects need to join local boards, run for government, write more about it? Just what are the mechanisms by which we can even start to engage around code?
I can take this first is, obviously I think it's about getting people into workshops and starting to have conversations with government leaders. Government, unfortunately, moves very slowly, and it takes a significant and consistent effort to try to implement change. And I think that, as a developer, we understand that getting code amendments and passing legislation and moving through that entire process, unless the issue is top of mind today, it is going to be a long road. And this is just a fact that you have to recognize, especially in major cities, that unless it's right now, and that happens, there's topics that are right now and are top of mind, and you just happen to get that confluence of right time and the right place. But otherwise, it is a long process of starting in committees, getting sponsorship of, for example, commissioners or political leaders like a mayor, for example, and having that conversation, workshopping through it, building support, finding community leaders who are willing to get on board with you on the subject. It's really, there's no shortcut to implementing change. And it's about having patience, meeting with these stakeholders, growing consensus, and then moving it through the government process for any particular local jurisdiction. Miami Beach has a different process than Coral Gables or City of Miami. So I think you just have to kind of get the right message aligned, get the right people on the bus, so to speak, and start driving the process forward. That's really the only way I see change getting implemented.
Jacqueline, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I'm going to turn off my video because can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I think being part of boards is absolutely essential. I also think that our organizations like the AIA, the ULI, all of the professional organizations to which we belong are on this. I was part of a study with ULI this summer. Rotterdam, New York, Miami, and New York City all participated in a study to build a business case for resiliency, to share that data. If I tell you that, we are the most impacted city from climate change and that for every dollar you'll get $8 back. And if I tell you the cost of inaction, the cost of doing nothing, facts and data that we can share with the business community, that we can share with local leaders. We have to be in the business of solutions and not, I don't believe we have the luxury to be doom and gloom and sad and just talk to each other about it. We've got to get to the place where decision makers have access to our expertise. In some ways, we are the best prepared people. I believe so. My whole life has been dedicated to convince people to spend a lot of money to do big things. And now we have to convince those same people why it's important to invest in this. What is the reason? And it's in whether it's their own self-interest or it's because they believe in the well-being of the planet and the communities that they're a part of. Whatever it takes, every tool in the toolbox we have to deploy. And I believe I've become much more active in the University of Miami and my academic community, but I didn't join the architecture board. I joined the real estate and development board, and I did so for a reason. And I'm the head of that resiliency committee because the people that need to hear it are not my people. The people that need to hear it, even though some architects, let me just say, do need to hear it, but the people that need to hear the message, the people that need the help in understanding what's possible. And by the way, Miami, if you look at our history, it was built from, you build it and they will come. Somebody built a giant highway to the Keys. Henry Flagler built a giant railroad. They had vision and they understood that to unlock the potential of a community, you have to put down some infrastructure. You have to invest. And we're long past overdue to put down some major infrastructure to build that next 100 years of Miami. But Miami is a young city. And Miami Beach is a barrier island that is an artificial construct. And if they had built it 5 feet higher, then we wouldn't be having this conversation, So I think there's a lot we can do. And I think we have to get off the sidelines and just jump in the fight and start looking at solutions. And not everything will be able to be solved, as Barton said. Not everything will be able to be saved. But if we can't, with the money that we have, with the resources that we have, with the intellect and the talent that we have, be about solutions and be about the future here, then what chance do communities that don't have the resources, that don't have that? I mean, if we can't show a way, then what about the Caribbean? What about all of those the coastal cities that don't have our level of resources? So I think now is the time, while we have those resources, to think big and to advocate for solutions. And that's our job.
Yeah. And just to add on to that, I mean, I can't say enough about the power of professional organizations to advocate for these kind of changes. It just amplifies the voice of people who understand the problem and have reasonable but the right solutions.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so important. It's good to go into your local community and talk about what needs to be done, but if you can work with a national organization to get change to happen from the top, that's going to be so much more impactful. So, that's absolutely huge. And I know that in my profession, the big changes that have improved our country's resiliency have come because of the advocacy of professional organizations. It's like going to the doctor. And the doctor tells you, here's the prescription. It's the same thing with infrastructure. So
yeah, and when it becomes the norm, when it becomes the code, when our AIA, when our code people change things, then it's a level playing field. Then everybody has to do it. Then the contractors, just like when I started, became lead, doing a green building is like, oh my God, how much more is that going to be? Well, you know what? Now it's like 10%. It's nominal, right? It's the same thing with resiliency. It's the same thing. If we all do it and we all have to do it, then the costs come down. Then it's not burdening one developer over another one. So I think it's important to change it.
To kind of add to that, not only the professionals like we have, here in the associations, that are promoting this as effective strategy. There's a couple of other ways to accomplish the goals too. One is incentivizing building. And sometimes it's much easier to create incentives versus wholesale code changes. So when you get the ability, as a developer, if somebody's giving me bonuses for adding certain features, in a way that's even like a trial run to kind of experiment with different strategies, and ultimately using that as an iterative path towards making a wholesale code change. And if you give the developer the right incentives, that becomes a valuable tool in implementing change. And then the other part is even factoring in, if you look at cost of insurance, if you get to the point where some of your property is just uninsurable or cost prohibitive, you're going to start seeing extreme downward pressure on property values, right? So ultimately, it's in the city's interest to try and push forward these changes. Because if you're thinking, a decade ahead of time or 2 decades ahead of time, and my lender or my investors are looking at a property and saying there's a risk of loss, or there's a risk that you're going to be facing that is cost prohibitive, or God forbid, something that could yield a total shutdown of your property as far as its effective use, it's how do you get out ahead of that? And I think incentives are a big part of it. And then working with insurance carriers and other monetary spheres of influence to make sure the right incentives are pushing people to develop with these strategies in mind.
Right.
That's huge.
Yeah.
We've laid out a lot of great strategies here. I'm going to try and quickly summarize before we move on to our next question, because I think this is vitally important. One is, of course, we should prepare for it to be a long struggle. I hope everyone heard that loud and clear. Change happens slowly. Second is that we need to get involved. And we need to get involved not just with our own professional community, but with other communities as well. And we need to be able to articulate the business case to people who, may not already see that as clearly, as we do. So I think that's really important as well. So our skills as architects, in terms of being really those hubs of many different professions, that's where that really comes into play. Barton reminded us, professional organizations have huge power. So if you're looking to make a change in your community, you want to reach out to your local chapter, you want to reach out to the national organizations, you want to drive change from the top down just as much as you're working bottom up. And then I think Rishi reminded us of two very important tools that I think have been used very effectively. Jacqueline earlier used the analogy of, LEED. Here are some tools that have been used very effectively. One is incentives to developers. Many cities have incentives. Portland just, announced a path to net zero incentive recently. There's there's decarbonization incentives all over the country. So, incentives can be a huge sort of a way of building that baseline. And then, bringing developers along, as we move forward. And then, of course, insurance tools, which are absolutely key. We need to understand what the risks are. We need to have the financial tools to be able to deal with them just as much. We need to have building strategies to be able to deal with them. Thank you all so much for that. That was fantastic. I just wanted to summarize because I felt like we touched a lot. I'm going to take another question here. Mark Collins asks, is Miami or Florida considering amphibious or even fully floating infrastructure? The UN is starting to look at this. Curious if Florida is too. Thank you. This goes a little bit to what you were saying, Barton, in terms of, how do we sort of let water in and then recover? So, certainly we've heard of this in other places. Is this an idea that's even serious? Is it something that's even within a 10-year horizon for the US?
I think that I went to see some in the Netherlands, and I think that it's definitely, it's part of a kit of tools. I've seen, in very high-end residential, they had a floating house. So it's possible, but it's not. And I know that they're looking at that at the University of Miami. There's a very, there's like an all solutions on the table kind of approach right now to see what makes sense, because there are areas that are going to be underwater, and for those areas, that might very well, for the higher end of the spectrum, be something that those people can consider. I would say probably it's not scalable at this moment to solve the bigger issues of the region, but I'm an all hands on deck and all, kind of study to see which one proves itself to be the best way. And so I think there are people looking at that, and I have seen one or two little pilot things for that. And I have been to a subdivision that did that just to see what it was like in the Netherlands. And so I know that it can be scaled into a subdivision scale. But even there, it seemed to me it was sort of a upper middle class or, a higher end kind of solution. So, but that doesn't mean, Miami definitely has that need. So we got to look at all sectors of the market at all times. So, because we need a healthy economy. So I'm not one that thinks that we only pay attention to one. When you're spending public dollars, you have to spend it on one that has the greatest public benefit. But if it's a private sector solution, then I think that's definitely something that people would look at.
Right, absolutely. We have a few questions here from Darcel Gill that I think all three of you will find interesting. First of all, Darcel says, sustainability is so important, people, planet, and profits. We need more resources in coastal Carolina where hurricanes impact my community. So Darcel is joining us from Carolina, where they definitely have a problem with hurricanes as well. She has two questions. One says, how do we prevent the silo mentality and yet perform JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion? So, how do we bring that equity and inclusion into our mindset around resilience? I think, Jacqueline, you just spoke about, thinking about class. Rishi, you were talking about affordability right at the start of this conversation. So all of you are thinking of that. I do want to bring in her next question, which is directly connected to water. She says, how can we redirect fresh water in communities that lack fresh, clean, desalinated water? What do we need in terms of water work? So water as a vehicle for equity as well. So let's talk about just in general, why are you interested in equity and inclusion alongside resilience? Why is that important to you? And I think, Barton, you might want to take a shot first at the water one in terms of redirecting fresh water, but whichever order you want to take that in.
Sure.
If you want to start, or you?
Sure.
Go ahead. I can
go ahead and get started. Yeah. Okay. So first off, I think just addressing the equity and inclusion. I think study after study has shown us that having a broad cross-section of people within a community is beneficial to our economy. It's good for everyone. So there's absolutely an incentive as a community to want to see that. And I think, unfortunately, we've seen historically, it's funny, we actually talk about this as civil engineers, that in South Florida, if you look at the geography of South Florida, the more wealthy communities have over time found their way to higher ground. They've put themselves in the place that is most hardened and left the poor communities out in the most vulnerable places. It's not across the board. There are certainly very wealthy communities. They're in compromised positions as well. But on average, we've seen that. So that's unfortunate. And then can you refresh my memory on the question about water?
On the clean water. That's going to be an issue of greater importance because, Barton, you can definitely speak to this, but as salt water rises and our aquifer is compromised, we've been beneficiaries of abundant supplies of fresh water, but that's going to be something that in the future we're going to have more and more solutions that are treated water, right? And that's why cisterns are going to be more of an issue, like they do in the islands where they don't have fresh water. But Barton.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Sorry. I slipped my mind. We're very fortunate again in Miami to have an abundance of fresh water available to us from our aquifer, but the way things are going, that's definitely not going to keep up with the demand, and it's also not going to last forever. Saltwater intrusion continues to get worse and worse. It moves slowly over time, but it moves a couple 100 feet every year, and that's going to eventually take out our water supply. Ultimately, realistically, the solution is renewable energy. We need to, there's no way to desalinize water without using a lot of energy. And we need to figure out how to get to a place where that doesn't involve pollution, And I think the technology is there, but now we need the willpower to be there.
Right. And also we need to reduce consumption and not throw literally fresh water down the toilet and change our living fat on the land kind of mindset to gray water recycling, to, using, less plants that are native, like all the things that we know better and we should do better. We have to do, which it doesn't need to affect your quality of life across the board if you plan it from day one and you're smart about it. When I first 10 years ago proposed gray water in the city of Miami, it was illegal because people, were saying that somehow people would get confused and drink the toilet water, which didn't make sense to me. But now, people have come around. I think when you live in a place like Miami, which is blessed with cheap energy, cheap water, all of those things, it's a mindset. And we need to educate that that's just the way that, and LEED certainly has helped us get there. But we're very few people in Miami are talking about net zero. We're still talking about LEED being LEED, So it's just because we have been very blessed, and we don't have a lot of the issues that they have in the north, and with the power being expensive. If we look to the islands, which we've done houses there, they're already dealing with brownouts. They're already dealing with fresh water being in limited supply. So a lot of the strategies we adopt are coming from our neighbors in the Caribbean that are already doing it, and they're doing it very successfully. Gray water, cisterns, solar, it's just, we're going to look more like that, I think, in the future.
Okay.
So just kind of
go ahead.
add to that, on the water side, Jackie hit it very well, and we're doing that in our project on capturing stormwater. The design is to be able to treat that for non-potable systems, and that way you're using less fresh water for those needs, whether it's irrigating plants or powering toilets. There's a list of categories that are really achievable as well as lawful, and being able to implement them. So I think strategies like that are extremely important to help reduce the consumption problem, which is one way to attack the overall issue. So that's something that we're dedicated to in our projects. And then on the next side, on the equity as a whole, when you're talking about these really in-demand submarkets where many people are just practically priced out of, you either have to choose to live in really, let's call it older or just worn down housing, compared to the alternative choice, which is giving up a higher percentage of your income to rent, which then prohibits your ability to function in other areas of your life. That's a horrible choice to have to make. And then the third choice being, I've got to spend, let's call it here in Miami, an hour commuting each way to some of these desirable submarkets just so I can get nicer housing that I'm proud of, that's up to a standard that I think many people want, but then my trade-off is I got to sit in a car an hour each way. So we want to be able to attack that problem. So how do you do that in a desirable submarket? You've got to address a couple of factors that all fundamentally come down to cost. And the cost and how you are able to attack that. One solution is micro units and co-living solutions, which is why urban is offering the type of housing that it is. It's about keeping a top line price down, so that way the tenant can keep more of their income in their pocket and use it for other purposes, as well as a better quality of life of being a part of the neighborhood that they want to be in and keeping themselves in housing that they're proud of and keeping themselves out of long commutes, which leads to other concerns like depression and anxiety, et cetera. So for us, it's how do you get creative with the local government? So we spent a year working with the city of Miami Beach to create a legislative category in the code for co-living solutions in the heart of South Beach. That was a long process, and ultimately we got through that. It was also allowing incentives for the developer to be able to bring that product to market and being able to make sure it's an economic win for the developer, which in return allows us to open certain solutions for the tenant as well and the price points that we're offering. And third, this does not exist, but I am dedicated to championing this for our communities that we are looking to work in. If you want me to spend what is not considered market expenses on resiliency and sustainability strategies, we would like to see some give from the local community as well. I'm looking at my projects with a 50-year plus horizon. Many people are looking at them in a 3 to 5 year horizon. So for us, I'm willing to make the investment because I think it's the right thing to do and it's the right way to ultimately offer the price point and the right strategies for sustainability and resiliency in these communities. But we would like to see the community participate in that, whether it's offsetting permit fees, offsetting impact fees. Give me something that allows me to invest that money into the product that I am trying to bring to market in a high quality manner. And ultimately that win is something that we can pass on to the consumer with such things as rent control on what the price for that workforce or affordable housing is. And we're willing to make those deals, but we need the local governments to participate to make it economically viable. Because when you raise money for a project and you're saying, well, my project is 10 to 15% more expensive than a standard project, you've got to have a way to overcome that with investors and lenders who aren't used to seeing those expenses. So if you're able to get some contribution from the community and the community wants us to build better, we'd like to see that flow both ways.
I'm just so excited to hear all of you talk about equity in this way. It's just really important. We need to give incentives and we need to get incentives. We need to understand that all changes are symbiotic relationships. They have to be win-wins, and we have to make that happen. So thank you so much for all your input on that. I mean, just fantastic. We have a couple of questions here. Ryan Brenner says, is NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program, a disincentive for support of mandatory zoning changes? Is there a way to build in resilience requirements to NFIP payouts? Has any of you given that any thought? Are people just sitting back thinking they're going to get flood insurance, or can we make resilience a part of their insurance payout?
So I have long said I think that the National Flood Insurance Program is really a disaster in some ways for communities like ours, because it doesn't price insurance per the market. And so what it does is it incentivizes risky behavior. And going back to what Rishi said, if your neighbor can do something that costs less and isn't disincentivized from doing that, even though it's going to end up, as a bad decision, what's your motivation, and how are you supposed to compete with that in the market, right?
I want to add one thing about that is that FEMA maps are notoriously political and have not been updated in some time. So when they get updated for our region, it's going to be a shock because a lot of areas that are not in a flood zone are going to be now in a flood zone. But the whole terminology of a 100-year storm or 200, it really has become kind of meaningless because with climate change, that's like every year we have 300-year things. So, even Copenhagen had, the cloud burst that was like $1 billion of losses, right? So places that have never experienced this kind of loss, this kind of repetitive loss, right? And so what's happening is that insurance companies are doing their own big data analysis of repetitive loss, and they have all the means in the world to calculate that. And whether the cities want to or not, or whether FEMA wants to or not, the trend is that insurance companies are going to start pricing risk for themselves. And that is the reality. And so you either get on the bus and get designed for it and be ahead of it, or you're going to get smacked because guess what? Insurance gets renewed on an annual basis. So just because you squeaked through and you were able to design something substandard that wasn't meeting the need of the future doesn't mean you're going to be able to insure that property down the line. And that's one of the things that we definitely talk to our clients about, that we want to future proof to the extent we can. We want to be thinking ahead of what we know is coming. And in the Keys, when they did that, for example, they did an analysis, and some of those roads are never going to get lifted because there are only 3 houses on that road. And they told those owners, guess what? You're never going to get a higher road. And those people on the flip side of what Miami residents are sometimes saying, please don't raise the road in my backyard. Those people are like, oh no, you're never going to raise my road. My value of my property eventually is going to be a big zero because I'm going to be underwater. So the FEMA maps are behind. We can't rely on the traditional ways of looking at risk, that little fuzzy line that says if you're an X or not an X. Florida's an X. We're all in a flood zone. That's just the reality. With a couple of exceptions of high ground, we're flat and we're going to be flooded. So planning for that, acknowledging the reality of science, acknowledging where we're going is job number one. We would be very irresponsible, I think, to do anything but look at data and look at science, look at the facts, and help our clients plan for it and make sure that we are resilient in that way too, that we're not designing something that's going to be out of date within 5 years. That's not what architecture is. It has to stand the test of time and it has to hold its value. So that's the other reason. It's not just about saving the world and, I'm a big believer that we need to do the right thing for the right reason, but it's also about being responsible. I mean, it comes down to that.
Right.
Just to add to that very briefly is, just look at even aspects of home insurance where you get a security alarm and you get a discount, and you have impact windows, or you've got an impact garage door for hurricanes and you get discounts. And I think ultimately, if we're able to work with insurance providers and provide the right incremental discounting, whether it's for raising the building because you're in a potential flood zone, whether it's having your generator available, because if you lose power and it's about sustaining the value of the property, making sure that mold is not creeping throughout the building and you're able to run AC, and okay, that's an incentive. If you lift your electrical vault, off the ground level, that should be an incentive. There's a variety of incremental wins that we can just work together, and then it doesn't feel like a big wholesale change. And I think that's got to be a kind of a parallel strategy to working with government on the code side.
He just mentioned something that I want to just highlight a little bit, which is it's about bouncing. Resiliency is about bouncing back faster, but it's also about limiting loss. And mold within a 24 to 48 hour period, if we have no AC and if we have no ventilation in our buildings, we start getting mold. The minute you start getting mold, then the damages skyrocket, because now you're talking about ripping out drywall. So it's not just about protecting from an event. It's about that period of time right afterwards that we need to make sure that our buildings can breathe, that our buildings have power, at least to run basic functions, to minimize loss and to get people back into healthy buildings as soon as possible. So that's all part of how we think about resiliency.
Absolutely. We're here talking about designing with water and collaborative solutions for coastal cities with Jacqueline Tuzet from Tuzet Studio, Rishi Kapoor from Location Ventures, and Barton Five from Kimley Horn. Thank you all so much for the discussion so far. It's been absolutely fantastic. We have quite a few questions from the audience on the docket here. We have quite a few questions on the docket here, so we're going to take some questions at a fairly rapid clip from here on. A quick question for you, Barton. Sandy asks, if utilities are going to be put underground, are we talking about waterproof containers? Is there a waterproof way of doing this so that, you know, we don't necessarily have to flood them?
Yeah, sure. So utilities underground are actually waterproof. The lines themselves are made to be placed in the water, and then they're placed in conduit to protect them from the elements. It's not actually the lines underground that are a problem, because they're well insulated and protected. It's those connection points at transformers and things like that. They're actually above ground. But nonetheless, in a community like Miami, where, you know, a storm surge can be several feet, a transformer on the ground could easily be flooded. But FPL, Florida Power and Light, which is our local provider here, has for years been publishing the results of an ongoing study to show that despite that risk, even during flood-related events that bring down power, on average, their customers are back online quicker with those types of systems than they are with overhead systems.
I have
and so part of the reason for this, right, is obviously, you know, wind can, well, personal experiences may vary, but on the aggregate, of course.
I respectfully disagree with FPL on that, but.
Well, I used to be underground and now I'm overhead, and I agree with FPL. But
no, I'm just saying that the brains of the building being at grade when everything else has to be lifted off, and we look at what the standards are for FEMA, that everything MEP has to be above flood. To me, I'm not convinced that it makes a lot of sense to put all of that at grade when that's what we're trying to do. I think it has to do with the design of their trucks and how they like to do business, and I'm not so sure, but that's just me.
Well, okay, fair enough.
Jackie's losing her power tonight.
Yeah.
No, and I'm not the only architect that's had issues with that. I mean, I think that a lot of my cohorts that are very much into resiliency and sustainability, it just mind-boggling how we're building vaults at grade when everything else has to be above grade. But that's just me.
Right. So the reasoning for this is, generally speaking, there's just fewer incidences of damage that cause the outage, right? Your personal vault, you may want to elevate, and you're in your facility, right? But a transformer that serves several homes, or a switch cabinet that serves an entire community, if that's brought down, it goes towards the top of the priority list because it's going to bring a lot of customers online very quickly. Whereas the damage caused from windstorms from overhead lines is generally isolated to individual laterals, because the larger transmission lines are well hardened, but it's those individual laterals going out to homes that get damaged because of the wind. And when that happens, you're chasing down a lot of small fixes, and you're going to be at the bottom of the list because it's only to help you. It's not really to help a community. And so when a switch cabinet goes down, it's the first thing that happens is they're out there and they fix it after the storm. And that's when I say resiliency is really about recovering. In the electrical world, that's what it's about, is we've put the thing that's most vulnerable from the wind underground where it's safe and protected. And the things that can be flooded, they can be quickly recovered. They don't need a replacement. They just need to be brought back on.
I will say, though, I agree in part with what you're saying, Barton, about the lines. But one of the things that I have heard is that if the waters don't recede quickly, and then you get you have, especially with buildings that have high-rise or elevators, or I know personally of clients who really their whole operation got shut down for a long period of time because the equipment was damaged, and it wasn't just flushing it out; it was completely damaged and had to be rebuilt. So I think if the 500-year rule for FEMA is to put all MEP stuff above flood, then I think that should be the goal. I don't understand why we would build obsolete kind of locate. I mean, we might be saying similar things but differently, but I do have a concern around that, and I think that's something as a community that we need to flesh out a little bit more and make sure that it's actually accurate, because while it's true that they get right on it right away, and Florida does have, just to toot our little horn a little bit, we do recover from disasters very quickly because we've been tested by so many storms. I mean, that's something that our FPNL does a really good job at getting out there and getting us back fast. But if our future is more events, more intense, more rapidly, I mean, there is a time that comes that more people are getting impacted at the same time. It's just inevitable that building in a way that avoids being taken down to begin with, or allowing for urban microgrids or things like that, needs to be part of the kit of parts that we look at as a community resilience as we get into more frequent, more intense storms. And that does seem to be our future. So it works now because we don't have it as much, but I think in the future it's only going to get worse. So
okay. Thank you so much for that. And I think there's bound to be points of disagreement like that, just because Barton prepared us for that right at the start. I mean, there's bound to be, competing trade-offs, and this is what makes this work difficult, but it's also what makes it worth doing. We need more research, we need more support, and we need more research we can trust. We need to understand that the incentives of people who are doing the research are aligned with, public good, and that's really important. So thank you both so much for that. We're going to take just a minute here. We have quite a few questions on the doc. However, we are at Metropolis trying to understand general preferences around sustainability and wellness, especially in architecture and interior design practice. So in a minute or so, you should see a second poll come up on your screen. If you can take a minute just to answer that, we will continue taking up questions as we go along. But when you see that poll come up, please go ahead and respond if you would like. You can, of course, dismiss it if you wouldn't like to. Dana Marsh asks, and Jacqueline, your point about mold brought me to this question, but I believe Rishi, you might have some kind of response here as well. How would you approach design with salty, humid air coming into the interiors? What are some strategies specifically around that? As we're looking more at outdoor air and passive ventilation. Especially, with COVID-19, a lot of the wellness measures and so on ask us to, put in filtration, if not that, to ensure exchange with outdoor air. And outdoor air is not a benign thing in Miami. So, can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so, definitely not only in general as far as well-being, well-building standard, as well as LEED. And now in a post-COVID world, you're going to see a lot of requirements for mixing in fresh air into the indoor building. And that's going to take energy requirements. That's going to take a variety of different factors to make that practical at a massive scale. But at the end of the day, I think it's a necessity to be able to move that forward. As far as the technical aspects of that, that is not my area of expertise. So maybe my colleagues here could pick that up. But as far as a requirement, I don't really see it as an option on a go-forward basis. And I think that, if anything, this pandemic has accelerated trends towards requiring more fresh air brought into buildings, but that is going to have a consequence on the energy side.
So on the materials side, we do have a very harsh marine environment. I think the air quality is, on the coastal areas is pretty good. But the salt definitely gets into everything in terms of materials, and things that work in other areas just simply won't work here because it's a tough environment. So window systems, glazing systems, metal treatments, we have to use a much more rigorous kind of level of finish, and we have to pay attention increasingly to what water is doing to our concrete and to our rebar and our concrete, things like that. I think concrete is way overdue for a major innovation because it's 200-year-old technology, and we're looking at things like fiber reinforced concrete that doesn't have metal in it because it doesn't corrode to the extent. And I'm very excited by that research, and I think that's something to watch. The engineers were working with at University of Miami are very much, they're already applying that into bridges in Florida. So I think we can expect to see that into building foundations that are underwater longer. Because corrosion is a big deal, especially Miami is a concrete town, and most of our construction is mostly concrete. So in terms of indoor air quality, we designed into most of our buildings have a lot of indoor outdoor spaces. So especially with COVID, having shady porches, it's a win-win in terms of climate because you get less air conditioning, more access to fresh air. So we do promote that, but the only way that works in our climate is to design it really in sync with the green, with the landscape, to make sure that we have vegetation and shade, and that we're looking at where the wind is coming from and where the sun is. So it's very much about, in a way, back to basics, not just layering technology, but also paying attention to what the sun is doing and where the breezes are, and trying to design spaces that are comfortable for human. And I think for us, putting in shady trees and working with nature as a system, as a green system, to play off of what we're trying to do with spaces and the design of community areas is vital. For as long as we can do that. We know that temperatures are rising, not just in coastal areas, but everywhere. And yet I think one of the things that we've been researching with this whole COVID thing is just fresh air. The idea that, when they had the last influenza rush, they started even teaching outside. That's one of the ways that you avoid the transmission of viruses, and that will soon fade from our consciousness again, and we'll become hopefully back to normal. But the lingering thought that we're in a not safe or not healthy environment is going to, I think, make us much more focused about how much fresh air intake we have in our buildings. Whereas before we were doing code minimum and this and that, I think now we're going to be, maybe we want to do a little bit more air exchange, have access to operable windows, and take things outside when we can. Outdoor air. In this project, we have outdoor conference rooms, outdoor meeting rooms. We have solar charging outdoor conference rooms so you can charge your phone for the community. We have fresh water that people that are walking their dogs or running can get chilled water that's chilled from the solar canopy. So we're trying to be creative about solutions that not only benefit the people in this building, but the neighbors that might be walking around or jogging or whatever, and that don't require AC, that are being charged by the sun, and also are healthier environments to be in. So embrace what you can about the nature that you're in, and work with nature is the message really that I think this project has really kind of been very focused on, and our practice has been focused on, because that reduces the amount of AC. And as we try to get to net zero, it is inevitable that we're going to be looking towards passive solutions like that as well. So,
right. We have a lot of questions piled up here, but I just want to point out a couple of comments. Valerie Amor says in the Q&A, and anybody who's interested in this, please go into the Q&A and take a look at the link she's posted. She says, "Are you familiar with the NYC Climate Resiliency Design Guidelines? We've just released version 4.0. It's currently applicable to city projects, but will be applied to private projects in the future. So anybody who's interested in that, please go into the Q&A and take a look at the link that she's posted. Jacqueline, you've set off a whole rash of questions around concrete, including bringing down embodied carbon with concrete in Miami. I apologize. I think we're going to hold those questions. If Jacqueline wants to put in a response in the Q&A, please go ahead. But we're going to hold those questions. I'm really sorry about that. We're going to try and stay focused on water-based strategies. But I couldn't agree more. Concrete is due for a rehaul on multiple fronts. And I'm very thrilled to hear about the research at the University of Miami around that. We'll take a couple of general questions here before we end today. Just as a thank you again to our panelists, Barton Fay from Kinley Horn, Rishi Kapoor from Location Ventures, and Jacqueline Touze from Touze Studio. Thank you also to our sponsors, Grohe, Durkin, and Material Bank for supporting today's discussion. Our first question, one of our attendees says, a number of coastal cities around the world have socio-ecological activities that have worked in coexistence with water. So fishing, trading, tourism, there's so many of those. And of course, Miami and Miami Beach in particular are great tourist towns as well. With the risk of rising seawaters, these are the activities that are now the most vulnerable. Are there ways in which we as a community can do something about making them resilient? obviously proximity to water and being on the coast bring economic benefit to Miami. So whether that's tourism, in other cities, it might be fishing, it might be trade through the port, of course, in Miami as well. So, are those economic incentives a way towards working better with the water, with being a coastal city? I mean, the fact that we're on the coast is something we have to safeguard for economic reasons as well, right?
Yeah. Listen, I mean, enjoying all of those activities is down to being able to have access to those activities. So, I think fundamentally it's important that, for example, in Miami Beach or City of Miami along the coast, that we're protecting the reason that people want to be there, which is being able to enjoy real estate and getting into the activities that come from those kind of launching points, whether it's enjoying the beach or going for a paddleboard or whatever that might be. So there are a number of activities. So ultimately, I think we have to be able to adapt, obviously, our real estate in order to meet the economic goals of being able to sustain activity in those locations. So, I mean, again, to me, it's a no-brainer that ultimately, if you're not thinking long-term and the trend is not our friend in this direction, as far as where sea level rise and the impact of groundwater coming up, I mean, it's a no-brainer. So if people are not getting on board with revisiting their building strategies, you're honestly risking becoming obsolete. And I think that, becoming obsolete in a zero loss is not a sustainable business plan. And ultimately, it's going to hurt the entire community where we all rely. That paddleboard shop that my wife and I love to go to on Purdy Avenue, there's real estate around there that you're enjoying a meal after. It's a nice area to congregate. One kind of feeds off of the other. And if you disrupt that by poor future planning or adaptability, you're compromising the entire economic ecosystem. And that's just one example.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think water quality is something that we need to focus a lot more on because, for example, Biscayne Bay, we're having a problem with the seagrasses dying. And there's a cascading effect. If this pandemic shows us nothing else, it's how interconnected everything, the smallest virus can upend the entire world's economy. Maybe it doesn't matter to you that the seagrass is dying in the bay, but it affects the fish and then it affects the water quality. And eventually it will affect whether or not people want to go boating or they want to go to our beaches. And sometimes, unfortunately, we have to have events that people can be jolted out of complacency to understand that water quality is, in fact, very important to our economy and very important to the wellness of our community overall. And that we are connected to what happens there. And our economy is very much a tourism economy. I wish it were more diversified, but yeah, I mean, I think we have to pay a lot of attention. And that's why the partnerships between not just architects and professionals, but the environmentalists, the preservationists. Somebody asked about the embodied concrete. I mean, this project, we're preserving a whole building that is the first line of defense is to try to adaptively reuse one entire building. Why? Because the embodied carbon in that is significant, and if it can be reused and it is worthy of being saved and restored, and it has a life into the future if we take care of it, then that's where we started this project. And we only built on the site of a project that was below flood, and it was a single story. So that building we did, and we had to make a very careful argument to the preservation community about how much thought we put into both of those decisions, both from a resiliency standpoint and from, we are cognizant that our culture and our history is important to preserve. And from a carbon standpoint, it's a win-win. The more intersections we can find between preservation and environment and the viable, sustainable cities, I think then more people can come on board of what resiliency really means. I think they're all interconnected.
Just to add to that real quick look at what happened over the last couple of years in a place that my family enjoys going is Siesta Key in Sarasota with the red tide that you had there. I mean, you shut down tourism for a big chunk of the year, and the smell was awful. People weren't going fishing. People weren't enjoying the water sports activity. Hotels weren't getting occupancy because the scene on the beach was just a disaster. So, I mean, you're having acute damage to your economy with any type of issue with the water quality. And it's of of pinnacle importance that we're doing our part to reduce the impact on our water.
Yeah. And just kind of taking my engineer hat off here as a resident, right? I mean, I lived here for a long time, and this is my home, and this is my community, and I don't really like going to the beach. I don't really like doing a lot of these things, and yet at the end of the day, that's why I'm here. This whole community is here for that reason, right? There wouldn't be anywhere for me to work. There wouldn't be anywhere for me to play in South Florida if not for those activities. That's what draws people here, and that's what's created this community.
Yeah.
Right. So we're almost at the end of the program here. I do have one last question for all the panelists. We'll take one last question. But before that, to Jacqueline's point, I just want to point out that we'll be back next Thursday with a discussion precisely about preservation and resiliency and the intersection of those in Miami Beach in the context of tourism and hospitality. So please join us for that discussion next Thursday at the same time. That will be hosted by Schulman and Associates. But one last question for today's discussion with all our panelists here. We have a couple of questions here about where can we look to for solutions. We have one question about, have you looked at nature, like passive strategies? We have a question about, have you looked at older flooding cities like Venice? So I would love for each of you to just think a little bit and tell me, what is one place that you have looked to and that you have learned from in your thinking about resilience? What has inspired you? What have you found most effective in giving you new ideas about how to tackle today's challenges? You can take a minute and then, I'd love to get a response from each of you.
For me, it's several cities that we've traveled to. Sometimes I need to leave Miami, go see what people are doing and building, and then come back and share that. It's almost like you go to the mountaintop and you come back and see. And sometimes you just want to hear if the hype really lives up to what they're actually building, because sometimes there's a lot of hype and it's not a lot really actually happening. So I find that the Netherlands, they actually are, because they are such compromised geographically, and they've had to build so much, the polders and how they approach things in a very, what I most appreciate, and everybody says, well, the Netherlands isn't Florida. Yes, it's not. We have a different geography, but they're like a teeny tiny country, and they just made, after a huge hurricane, the mindset that they have, that they were going to make it part of their national strategy to be resilient, and not only to do it for themselves, but then to be exporters of that knowledge for the rest of the world. I find that Dutch approach, which is pragmatic, spend the money where you need to spend it, build a resilient tomorrow, take care of your past, preserve your canal houses. I find that they both preserve and they build for the future, and they're very practical about how they do it. It's always about the business case, and that they've managed to make a sort of a global presence for this little teeny country. I think that should inspire all of us in the resiliency department. I've also thought Copenhagen was a great example, and Germany has got some really great examples. I think, the ULI study that I was with, where when we share stories of global cities, I think that sharing is so important right now for all of us to be inspired to know that there are solutions out there, that yes, some of them take vast levels of resources, and if we think about them ahead of time, it kind of is a little bit off-putting, but you got to start somewhere. And there are solutions out there at the small scale for residences to help them harden their buildings, and at the big scales for cities to think bigger about what they need to be doing to protect the vulnerable and to create a viable future for all of us. So that's where I find it. Venice is, by the way, I'll just put a plug for Venice. Venice to me is like a jewel, and my heart is just like, every time I go there, I worry some piece of it's going to be missing it's one of my favorite cities in the world. If you look at the terrazzo that they designed and how it's designed to be flexible and move, if you look at how the Doge's Palace had extra height in the columns, and so it's been shrinking over the years, they were thinking about the future. And so there's always something to learn from the past. But I think the level of challenge that we're looking at is so unprecedented, and it requires science and technology, that I don't think there is anything too far in the past that we can look to. We really have to be futurists right now and come up. We've already put ourselves in a corner, and the solution has got to be science-based, and it's got to be, smart passive things, yes, but it's going to require a level of investment and infrastructure, no question.
Yeah. Barton, do you want to come in next?
Sure. Well, we have a lot to learn, obviously, like Jackie said, from other communities who have dealt with this in the past. But also, we're so unique that we gotta also think about our reality, which is also different from them. We're extremely densely built out already in some of these vulnerable areas. So it's about implementing change as a community, right? We've got to figure out how to come together and make these things happen on a larger scale. And it shouldn't just be up to individual property owners to deal with it. We got to come together as a community and figure out what the infrastructure solutions are. As far as nature and bringing nature back, there are plenty of communities in South Florida that are vulnerable and also not very dense and that have these problems, coastal single-family home communities. And they're in a tough situation because the economic business case isn't there to raise every one of those homes and raise the roads for those folks. But as Rishi said before, the right incentives for developers to come into those neighborhoods and build a community could prevent us from having to make the tough decision of investing huge amounts of government and tax dollars into those communities. And instead, we can give the right person the opportunity to turn that community into something that brings back nature as part of a resilient solution. So that opportunity is out there, and we just need to seize it.
So urban, I love this question. So urban, in the years that my team and I were developing, our kind of social mission on what we wanted this brand to stand for. Yes, a big part of it is the affordability aspect, but pillar number 2 is the sustainability aspect, and number 3 for us is mobility. But the sustainability is something that we spent years researching projects in Asia, like Singapore, for example, and Hong Kong, and then a couple of projects that we saw in Australia as well. And I had a trip that was very inspiring, where a couple of engineers from Australia had come over to visit my wife and I and one of our friends, and they were telling us stories of 50-story high rises that 10 years ago they were doing gray water retreatment in those buildings, and kind of laughing that it wasn't even really a topic for so many Americans. And for me, what I really want to see happen, my ultimate dream for our urban projects as we grow as a company, as technology becomes cost enabling, and ultimately government is also on board, is we want to see our projects achieve net zero off the grid status on each of our real estate. And that means microgrids on the building. A company that we were working with designed a Hero motorcycles factory in India that was 100% off the grid. They had solar power. They were taking the heat exhaust off of their AC systems and using it to spin turbines to produce power on site in case they didn't have enough solar stored. They were using parts of the roof of the factory in order to grow and harvest agriculture as well. And just that is my dream for our projects, is to be able to introduce elements of each of that into them. So that way we just do our part on a one-off, hopefully inspire others as well by bringing these strategies to projects. And it's not going to all happen overnight, but as they say, how do you cross, 1,000,000 miles? It's a step at a time. And if we can all do our part and take inspiration and not be afraid to take the giant leap, but just go a step at a time, we'll be heading in the right direction. So those strategies are what's near and dear to my heart. And that's been inspired by my family being from India, ultimately seeing these projects in Australia and other parts of Asia, and just hoping to bring that here with our design.
Great. Well, this has been a fantastic discussion. Thank you all so much for all your insights and inputs. We are well past our end time, but well worth it, I hope, to everyone who's been listening in. thank you all who are still here for sticking around. And thank you also for the amazing comments and questions in the Q&A tab. Before you leave today, I urge you to just take a look there. Ideas from today's discussion are going to the University of Kansas, to the School of Architecture of Chicago. They're going to make their way into classrooms, which is fantastic. Thank you so much to Barton, to Jacqueline, and to Rishi for being so generous and so incisive in your comments today. I have learned so much from the three of you. I'm sure everybody who joined us has also learned from you as well. Thank you for being so generous with your time. Thanks, of course, also to our sponsors, Grohe, Durkin, and Material Bank for supporting today's conversation. Today's discussion, for those of you who are interested, will be broadcast on DesignTV by SANDOW, on Metropolis's homepage, as well as the homepage of Interior Design Magazine and the Facebook pages of both publications next Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you want to catch that or want to share that out, please do so. Following that, next week, this discussion will be available for on-demand viewing on our website, metropolismag.com, on our think tank page. That's metropolismag.com/think tank. So pretty easy to remember and easy to get to. So if you want to catch any part of this conversation, please go ahead and look at that. A write-up of report of this conversation will also appear in a future print issue of Metropolis, so look out for that. Thank you all so much for joining us today. This has been a fantastic discussion. You all give me hope, and you all give me real sort of optimism for the future of our profession, but also for the future of our communities. This has been a really important conversation. Thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
Barton and Jackie.
Hi, my name is Brittany Chevalier McIntyre, and I'm the executive editor at Lux Interiors and Design Magazine. Welcome to What's New, What's Next? Thoroughly Modern Mix-Up, a conversation with Hickory Chair about modern design. Today, I'm speaking with the VP of Design and Creative Direction at Hickory Chair, Skip Brumley, and artist and designer Susan Habel, about their newest collections and their authentic design approach and passion. While these two need no introduction, for the past 8 years, Skip Brumley has led the fashion and design aesthetic for the 109-year-old heritage company Hickory Chair. Skip has been responsible for leading product innovation, merchandising product assortment, and creating collaborative collections with each of their design partners. Over the past 20 years, Skip has forged a career with and engaged with some of the most prestigious luxury brands in the furniture industry, where he has designed interiors for showrooms and galleries, as well as lighting, accessories, and furniture. Sisters Susan Habel Smith and Catherine Habel founded New York City-based textiles company Habel Construction in 1999 and named it after their great-grandfather's 20th century road construction business. Merging their expertise and talents, Susan the artist and Catherine, a born sales professional who has worked with the late Kate Spade and Polo Ralph Lauren, the Habel sisters are leaders in 21st century textile design. 2 decades after its inception, Habel Construction continues to grow and today produces fabric and rug lines, as well as pillows, fine art and accessories for Maitland Smith, and furniture for Hickory Chair, of course. Thank you both so much for being here with me today to speak about your newest collections.
Well, thanks for having us, Brittany.
Yeah, thank you.
So happy. So let's dive right in. Susan, I know you've worked with Hickory Chair and the wonderful Skip for years now, together making some of the coolest furniture in the industry. With your third Hickory Chair collaboration, what is it about the brand and specifically working with Skip that has you coming back to create more?
Well, there are a lot of things that keep me coming back. You know, I think when you're doing something for so long, you do question what keeps you coming back. And I made a little list because I thought are definitely things that do. Of course, the thing that keeps me coming back over and over is the creativity and the energy when we do start developing a new collection. And Skip is usually right in the middle of it, you know, with every idea. So that is enough to, you know, it's just like stirring a pot. So, and which means the next thing on my list was all the enthusiasm. Everyone is always so excited to introduce new things. And so it's not just me that gets excited. It's literally everybody in the factory, all the team, the design team, Skip, Laura, who does our PR, you know, it's everyone. So I think we all feel that, and that energy goes into making a new collection. And then lastly, I am competitive, and I think we all, seriously, Skip, I do think we all love to have new things come out and to challenge the industry. You know, the pressure it's kind of a wonderful pressure, but the pressure between all the designers, it's this wonderful, without talking about energy again, it is this kind of momentum when a new collection comes out, and then the next, and then we're all excited about seeing what the next person brings. So it is very collaborative. It's full of energy and enthusiasm. Every time, even if I'm not the one developing the collection, but another member, another designer, or like Skip developing his for this market, we're all thrilled for him.
A lot of it is about the people, right? I mean,
totally
important. So speaking with you both a few weeks ago, I learned that you two are truly simpatico in many ways. Skip, you remarked that Susan and Catherine are like sisters to you, and that you and Susan share many of the same sensibilities, which I have to say is very apparent in your newest lines. They are modern with their own fresh perspectives. So tell me, Skip, a little bit more about your working relationship with Susan and the importance of partnering with designers that are like-minded.
Well, to be fair, I've got, you know, I'm simpatico with all of our design partners, you know, but these are all, they're kind of like sisters and brothers in the fact that we're all have very different and dynamic relationships. But there's always something, whenever when I try to pull in, or whenever I'm pulling in a designer to possibly partner with Hickory Chair, what I'm interested in is their DNA, their you know, perspective on, you know, product and furniture and interiors possibly, and just, you know, and hopefully they're bringing something very different to Hickory Chair, but I want them to fit within the Hickory Chair family, and I hope that makes sense. But so yeah, Susan and I think we just, you know how it is sometimes when you meet someone and you just click.
So romantic.
And it feels familiar. And yeah, it was pretty immediate with Susan and Catherine Habel. I just immediately fell in love with them and their energy and enthusiasm. And at the time, they were doing an exclusive collection of fabrics for Hickory Chair. And so I saw a lot of, you know, their personality coming through that, and they would come to market and they would design, you know, they had this tiny little space in our showroom that they would style themselves, and it was amazing what they would do. And I was just like, I mean, I just thought they were amazing. And then one day Susan called me and she was like, they were talking about furniture, but not with us, like doing their own. And I was like, why don't you do furniture for Hickory Chair? And she's like, well, we didn't know that that would be an option. And I'm like, well, show me what you got. And I love the idea that they're not these, you know, big interior designers with books and press, that there's a whole different point of view coming from an artist. And, you know, they did a proposal. They had these brilliant ideas with furniture that were very different and fresh. And I don't know if that answered your question. I hope it did.
No, it does. And it actually leads perfectly into the next question for Susan, speaking about, you were saying that Susan's really comes from an artist point of view. I would first love to know, Susan, how this collection, what inspired it in terms of art, and then how is it different from the other two collections that you've designed for Hickory Chair?
Well, the signature and the voice of the third collection hasn't changed. And so I think that goes to, as far as a first collection, a second collection, or a third, I am an artist. So that is my perspective. And each collection has been, has filled in holes where I saw them when I was looking at the collection from, the outside looking in. And then the third collection was really, I felt like there were still some things that were not in the prior two collections. And so that's an easy way of saying, okay, so I filled those things in first. And then, there are definitely pieces that my heart leans to. And when I'm presenting a collection for the team, it's really showing Skip the pieces that I'm interested in making. So if I have some dreamy pieces, of course, some of those are to fill in the ideas, but then the rest are, the things that I would choose to design just specifically for the group.
And Skip, I love how you remark that interiors should be both masculine and feminine, creating a type of tension by mixing forms. So when you went into your design process, similar to Susan's, what were your initial thoughts, and what type of environment did you really want to create for the clients and the people who are looking at your furniture and wanting to buy it?
Well, I've designed other collections for other companies before, where I would dream up a fantasy client, and I would go really I would deep dive into almost like a character development, almost like, so I was setting a stage or a scene for them, to the point where I would even pick out the building, if they were in New York, how old they were, what their economic status was, their demographic, and decorate a home for them, and then style the furniture. I didn't want to do it this time. With Hickory Chair, I wanted it to be, because I've designed pieces for Hickory Chair, but this is the first time, they asked me to design an actual collection, and they're going to put my name on it. And so I wanted it to be more personal. So I looked at my own house, and where and how and recently in the past couple of years, I've moved from one type of house, which was modern, into a very traditional 40s Cape Cod. And that was a really great exercise in editing. And I've obviously been in the industry for over 20 years, and I'm exposed to a lot of different furniture and a lot of different things. And I follow fashion, and I follow art, and I obviously follow interior design and the furniture industry. So I get excited by a lot of different aesthetics and ideas. So it's very easy to end up with, vegetable soup when you're in a position like mine, because you're just like, well, that's a great, chair that's Baroque or whatever. And then this is a really great Italian mid-century piece. But how you can mix it is really, crucial, because you've got to make them sing. And that's a tricky dance when you're mixing different periods and styles. And so I had to do that when I moved into, a couple of years ago, I downsized into a little Cape Cod, and what am I going to do with all my furniture? And I don't want to lose my personality. I don't want to create a stage set for myself. So I really kind of took that and ran with it when I had to develop my own collection. And there's a lot of, tension in my environment. I love a curvy, upholstered silhouette. I like my upholstery to look like, feminine almost. But and I like very architectural case pieces. And so I think those kind of things, like, you know, where something's very, like, you know, strict and edited and restrained, but then you have this really kind of voluptuous but modern upholstery silhouette that can read as feminine. I think that's lovely, and it creates an interesting dynamic. And so that's how I wanted to address my collection. In that regard, I also really looked at who is the customer at Hickory Chair. We do such a huge designer business. I mean, I think it's 85% of our clientele are interior designers. So I wanted to make sure that I give them the opportunity. I just wanted to give them a good platform, a good foundation with strong silhouettes, great materials, but give them the opportunity to put their own spin on it for their clients. You know, so I don't do a lot of tricky hardware. I try not to do things too specific, but I also love a clean, just really clean, pared down form. But they can zhuzh it up as much as they want, and they can stripe it. They can choose their own veneer. They can do all these different things that, you know, and take advantage of all the tools that we have at Hickory Chair to customize it so it becomes theirs, because it's the designer is designing for their client. And so I just want to make sure I wanted to make sure I was giving them a lot of great tools to work with.
And Brittany, actually, if you want to know, that's a big spot where Skip and I stand together. We do, I think the thing with the more modern forms offers that. And both of us really love to use or to keep those clean, keep the adornments minimal. I mean, hence both of our collections leaning more modern. It does allow for a lot of the tools that we have at Hickory Chair to be used. And that's when we kind of back out of the equation. Maybe it has less of our name glued on it, like maybe it feels less branded, but the whole point for us is to really dive into the form and the sculpture of the piece.
We don't want to over design it.
Right.
Neither, I think Susan and I have a lot of it in common. We don't want to over design it. We don't want it to be like way specific where people are intimidated and they feel like they've got to buy it that way. Mm-hmm. So we focus on, which really comes from a very kind of artistic point of view, you know, paring down the form and just doing an exciting, bold stroke. Mm-hmm. And having a really great silhouette, whatever it is, whether it's upholstery or case. And it provides, you know, the designer to either take it as it is, which I love in their pure form. I mean, that's the way I want it. But they can make it a traditional piece with just a piece of hardware, or changing the veneer, or using a distressed finish. You know what I mean? So it's a really cool experiment to you know, and I think we're offering the designers a lot more freedom.
Absolutely.
Also, I'm sorry, Brittany, I just wanted to tell you one last piece that, you know, I thought of when I was thinking about you and I, Skip. I was thinking about how we design, and this is maybe more interesting for somebody that really wants to understand, like, how do you get started? But we work directly with a 3D CAD person. Skip can do a lot of his. I don't do that, but our voice translates directly to the person that's helping us make the piece digitally. So there's not like somebody generating the idea that, oh, I think I like this. I mean, it comes directly from us. So the translation is more direct. Literally, our signatures are on every piece of furniture and all those little details. So he and I both work very similarly that way. So, I mean, that's kind of like behind the scenes studio talk, but that's really how it breaks down. It's wonderful. I think we both understand that language, you know, rather than having somebody else do that for us.
Of course. And that's really where you create the designs, and the design world, the designer can also come in and customize it, which I think is one of Hickory Chair's greatest offerings also. Because And because a majority of the production is domestic, this makes customization easier to control. So how important is that for both of you in terms of producing the product and then also to Hickory Chair's brand ethos?
Oh, wildly important to me.
It's wildly important to me too. I mean, that's one of our favorite things to have access to that and to have that, to be able to drive over. I mean, for both Skip and I mean, it's a fairly short drive for us to get to the factory. A trip to the factory when you're talking about, a 1/4 of an inch matters to me. I know it matters to him. And we talk about that it's a luxury to have the domestic manufacturing, and to do things the way we do at Hickory.
It saves time. It's efficient. It's awesome.
It's a real luxury, like Susan said, when you're developing and you're designing the product, because you can go over and they'll make a prototype. It's one thing to have an idea and then to actually get it a sketch and then to get it translated into CAD, but then to see a 3-dimensional form in front of you and to be able, like, especially if it's upholstery, to sit on it and be like, oh, to have the luxury to be able to do that in person and make more than one prototype if you have to, and to tweak everything. That's why everything at Hickory Chair is so comfortable, because we're able to, because we're not throwing a CAD somewhere overseas and hoping it shows up right.
Yeah, if needs to be some foam in your lumbar or on your shoulders, like when Skip sit in a chair of mine, he'll be like, oh, my shoulder, I can feel the wood. Then to add the cushion, where to mold and to tweak. And so, and we put Skip's 6'3", is that how big you are?
Yeah.
6'3", and then we'll put the tiniest person in the factory in the same upholstery piece. And we really check to see, okay, how does your rear end feel in that?
It's really important that we do that, because everybody's got a different tush and a different body. And so we test different body types in every single piece of upholstery, because we want to kind of reach a common denominator. Mm-hmm. And so that it's a pretty, great piece, no matter who you are.
So doing that in the factory, we wouldn't have that luxury if we weren't. To go and do that.
And then also, then once it's actually for sale, we're not waiting on a boat, coming through customs.
It really helps to get those pieces just right.
Well, no, but I'm saying, once we're selling the items, it's made domestically. So we're not waiting for it to come over on a ship, in a container where you can run out of stock and things like that. So I love trying to keep all the pieces domestic so that they are pretty readily available.
Absolutely.
And you can rush a piece and it's not going to be held up in customs somewhere.
Hallelujah. I have to say, we all know that. So being in the magazine industry and doing photo shoots, things get held up in customs all the time. So, so both of your collections, they're contemporary, as we spoke about. However, the way that you've chosen to define modern design differs. So I'd like to look at some similar examples of furnishings from each of your collections that accentuate a certain detail over others and highlight your own unique vision of modernity. So I'm a huge fan of caning. I love it. So Susan, let's take a look at your Wallace chair, and Skip, your Mariette side chair. Susan, how did you choose to balance materiality with this piece? The textile cushion and then the sleek lines of the wooden arms.
So that's a great question, Brittany, because, we were just talking about domestic manufacturing, but because it's caning, and that's not in the United States, we do rely on some resources where their skill set is better than we can find here. Caning happens to be one of them. So that piece comes in as is. And even though it's classic and so beautifully done, I have to say that is a favorite piece of mine. The textile element was just one way that you could customize it. You could add leather or chenille or a umbrella fabric, or, you know, basically anything, or a print. And you don't necessarily have to have the cushion, but that's the difference between the caning and the textile. The other thing in a bigger picture was the fact that I wanted caning in the collection in general. You know, we make wood at Hickory Chair, and proudly so, but we all, and I know Skip will agree with me, we are always trying to have a different texture come in to mix with the wood, so that it's not just wood, you know, we try to keep it interesting. And the collection from feeling maybe too heavy. So, you know, the rattan is a way, that was at least my thinking when I approached the rattan. And then the pattern that Skip and I both used is just a newer pattern that we were able to access, and we both really loved it. So
radio weave.
Yeah.
Radio weave, yes.
Yeah.
And Skip, I know your Mariette, is it Mariette, correct?
Yes.
Cane backside chair. It is inspired by a vintage French dining chair.
Yeah.
So how did you go about modernizing this?
I just cleaned it up.
Usually traditional piece? Oh, clean it up.
I just cleaned it up. I mean, it's pretty easy. I mean, that's nothing new. A million other people have done it. You know, you take that simple French chair and you can take off, you know, a lot of the ornament, and it's a really beautiful, clean, pure form. And getting the scale right is tricky, because especially if you're working with, if you're looking at an antique, you know, they're tiny, but you also don't want it to, you know, blow it up like it's on steroids. So just maintaining a refined detailing, but you know, pulling away all the extraneous decoration, so you end up with a pure form. And the Mariette chair, yeah, I love that radio weave caning. There's a modern sensibility to it. It's tight, it's clean, it's natural, and it just adds another texture. And the Mariette dining chair is available upholstered or not. So you don't have to do the caning. It's available with an upholstered back as well. But yeah, it's like what Susan said. It's great when you can introduce a different kind of texture to the collection and to the line overall. And also you keep seeing it. I keep seeing, like, you know, wicker all of a sudden showing. Over the past couple of years, everybody's obsessed with a wicker lamp. It's like everybody's doing a beach house all of a sudden. But there's something about it. Hermes came out with these like amazing wicker boxes about, you know, so there's something about it that I'm sure that whether it's consciously or subconsciously, we react to it because we keep seeing it. And so all of a sudden you want to do something kind of like a natural textile. And it just kind of, it gives like that little French form, even though it's cleaned up. I like the you know, the caning on the back, because it just gives it a casual sensibility, but it makes it even a little bit more chic.
So now looking at some dining tables, Susan, now is it pronounced Freya dining table?
It is.
It resembles, it's very cool because it resembles a classic picnic style table, but it's so much more than that. Made with custom hammered metal plates and stretchers that join each side. Can you explain how this table was a true victory in engineering, and really what led you to the picnic style design?
I'll tell you now that it almost didn't happen.
I was going to say it was a victory. I could do a high kick over here for that victory. The day before market, it literally came the day before market. They said that it wasn't going to be able to be done. And the catch is the engineering, all the legs and the bar, it all has to come together at one time. And I think people in the factory, the workers, were wondering, how can we make this without me using 12 people for every table that, you know, rolls through this place? So they figured it out. I do not know how they figured that out, but I'm just happy that they did.
It was a miracle. Because I kept hearing, because we even came up with a second dining table, because we're like, this isn't going to happen, because engineering and the factory was like, it's a very complex table, you know, where, and God, even just trying to describe, where the legs, like they come in, they're at different angles and they have to join perfectly at a center point, and it's a feat of engineering. But they figured it out somehow, and we were just like, great, we showed up, you know?
You're like, yay!
So
And it's very cool.
Skip, you took a more curvaceous approach compared to Susan's angular one, right? Yeah. The Ray dining table was inspired by fashion, by the iconic Tiffany Elsa Peretti cuff. So how did you translate a piece of jewelry into a piece of furniture and actually make it work? It's
pretty
amazing.
Straightforward.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty evident what I did. I mean, it's a cuff. That's exactly what it is. I mean, so listen, I drew like a million different dining tables, and you don't want to do this. You know, at the beginning of this, Susan said we're all competitive, and we are. You know, we don't want.
See, you're finally.
It's true. So
You'll
like
lose.
we look at, you know, our competitors or the, you know, everybody else that's in the industry, and we just want to be better, and we want to be cooler, and we are, I think. And so, I mean, I think I think we're all very lucky, and we're happy that we get to work for one of the coolest companies in the industry, and we all know that. So the idea was, I designed a lot of different dining tables, and I was like, oh, well, that's too reminiscent of this or that or the other, and I'm just, you know, like I said, I'm inspired by a lot of different things. I love Elsa Peretti. I don't know why. It's not like I wear her jewelry. I mean, I've got her. I have her bowls, you know, because she does stuff for Tiffany, like home, where I've got like one of her bowls. I've got her bone candlesticks, and I just loved her sensibility. I love the history of it, and I've always thought that those cuffs that, you know, women would wear, like with Halston in the 70s, was like the sexiest thing you could do. And it's also a little Wonder Woman, you know, probably fantasy that I had in the back of my head too. But I thought, well, I could do that. You know, why couldn't we do that? You know, everybody in engineering was like, what do you mean? You know, it's open. But yeah, we made it work. And I also I like the idea, I like doing, having little surprises or giving the opportunity to a designer to do, you know, a combo finish, and just these subtle different tricks, surprises in a piece. So depending on where you're looking at that table, it looks like just a straight column. But then when you turn the corner, you're like, oh, it's open, and maybe you have an alternate finish on the interior. So I just think that's lovely, and it's a piece of jewelry.
It's very cool. Now, I don't know, Courtney, I don't know if we have time for this, but I'm going to do a quick rapid fire. So Skip and Susan, just say the first thing that comes to your mind, okay?
Uh-oh, okay.
And Susan, it'll go Susan, then Skip, okay?
Great.
Favorite cocktail?
Margarita.
Skip.
What?
Favorite cocktail?
Beer.
Okay, next one is mountain retreat or beach getaway?
Ooh, beach getaway.
Beach.
Are we doing Hulu or Netflix?
Netflix, baby.
Netflix.
What is your guiltiest pleasure?
Dark chocolate every night.
I watch The Real Housewives.
What is your go-to design motto?
Keep it simple.
Did we just say the same thing?
You both just said the same thing. Keep it simple.
You're kidding. You just said that? No way.
Yeah, you both did. So
here's our little bubble, our cartoon bubble. Mine's going over to his.
For sure. Well, Susan and Skip, thank you so much for joining me today. I had so much fun. And thank you to our viewers for tuning in. We hope you enjoy What's New, What's Next. My name is Brittany Chevalier McIntyre, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks,
Susan,
Brittany.
Skip.
Skip. Thanks,
Bye.
Brittany.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lux.